Welcome to this episode of Behind the Roast. This month I'm going to feature sample roasting. But what is this machine in front of me? This is a machine that's very close to my heart, just like the art and science of sample roasting itself. This machine is called the Golden Coffee Box. It was designed and manufactured under the guidance of my dad, Jacob Booth. His name is proudly on this machine. Jacob's vision was that consumers should roast their own coffee at home. And so he was dreaming of a world where coffee consumers would source the best possible varieties under his guidance, of course, and roast and brew and enjoy and savor these unique coffees at home, single origin. Now his vision worked out a little bit differently because these machines ended up in his store, the Golden Coffee Box, in the town of Baarn, half an hour from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And in this store, he was test roasting with these machines before shipping them to the clients around the world. And with all this roasting going on, he had a perfect opportunity to also test the samples and the coffees that were sent to him for analysis. And that's where my story started with coffee. Now we're talking about the 1970s. After high school, I would come in, roast samples with the Golden Coffee Box, have my father inspect and analyze how well I did or did not. And then we would often review the flavor of the coffees, look at the color, and do the analysis after that as well. And this is where, of course, the sample roaster fits really in the analysis of the quality of your green coffee samples. With this machine, the roasting was fairly simple. With this measure, you could weigh out or portion enough coffee beans, 120 grams, to be roasted. The spinning drum, electrically heated, would start a time temperature cycle with this timer here. And then during the time of roasting, the machine would follow an automatic time temperature profile. During the roasting, sampling and smelling the samples, and then at the end, discharging the beans into the cooling tray. And that was how my experiences of coffee started. Now, the Golden Coffee Box as a machine is not available anymore. It's now really more of a collector's item. But fortunately, we have a manufacturer like Giesen who really went back to the drawing tables to design what I would say is almost kind of the perfect sample roasting tool, the WPG1 sample roaster. So in today's episode, I'm going to, of course, roast with the WPG1. And also, I'm going to review some of the important protocols that are relevant when you are preparing and when you're executing your sample roasting. I cannot stress the importance of doing these sample roasting practices as well, because when you're doing sample roasting for the evaluation of coffee for purchase, then you definitely want to do this in a very serious manner. You also want to roast your samples in a way that is somewhat consistent with the profiles you do with your commercial, with your industrial machines. So let's talk about all of this, and I hope you will enjoy today's episode. So before we start roasting samples with the WPG1 sample roaster, I want to go over some of the ground rules, the basic steps of sample roasting. And I want to ask you, why do we sample roast? Why don't we just buy this coffee that is offered to us by a reputable supplier? Like here I have a sample from La Mula from my own farm. And I pour out the sample and I smell a nice, interesting fruity smell, a little bit like a dried melon, peach. This tells me a little bit about what I could expect later on in the coffee itself. But why do we sample roast? First and for all, of course, it's a great way to get to know the flavor profile of this coffee, because once we sample roast, we can grind it and cup it. Secondly, it also helps me to assess whether or not the investment I'm making in this coffee is a good investment, whether or not this is really what I need in my product portfolio. And third, we also sample roast to ultimately be able to assure, to validate that the sample doesn't have any unexpected defects, any hidden problems. And then once you start getting ready for sample roasting and you do your kind of this sensory assessment, then you will want to make some really objective measurements. Like here, using a moisture analyzer. This analyzer also allows you to measure the density. We will want to use a really good scale so that we can always roast the same amount of coffee. That's important for the sake of consistency. I want to use a good timer for this purpose. I have a timer on my machine, but I also like to have a backup timer. And then you will want to have some trays for roasted coffee samples. And these trays are very handy because you can manipulate the sample in any way possible. You can fill it in a bag or in these plastic trays. And then, last but not least, I have this roasting and cupping journal, which is written by Giesen. It helps us to write down some of the essential information about the coffee, the moisture, the density, the overall physical quality, and also the actual grade. I can make some notes about that. If you're interested to learn about grading, I recommend that you visit our online courses at coffeecourses.com. You can learn about grading and cupping and roasting and all of that. And then once you have written down the information in here, together with your cupping information, then you have a good set, a usable set of information that will tell you more about the quality of the coffee. So the sample roaster, the machine itself, I see it as a very important quality tool and also as a business tool, because it helps me to limit my risk when I'm investing my money, my dollars or euros in my green coffee inventory, and that's really important. The sample roasting, I recommend to do it in a space that is private, where you can fully focus on the job at hand. So why don't we do a roast together so that I can talk about these important additional aspects. So here is my awesome WPG1 a sample roaster. This machine was introduced by Giesen about 5-6 years ago, and it incorporates many design elements that I had wished to see on sample roasters for a long time. Some of the unique and great features are a really good bean temperature sensor. On top of that, also an optional environmental drum temperature sensor. But here on top of the machine is actually the exhaust air temperature sensor. And then we have, you can see that, a really handy light, allowing me to look really closely at the color of the beans. And then I have 3 cooling trays, which basically gives me the ability to dump my roasted coffee, cool this sample, continue roasting also for the sake of roasting machine stability, move my sample tray over to the next slot, and then keep roasting while the sample is still continuing to cool. That's really cool. And let me also let you take a look at the other sides of the machine so you can get an idea of what features this machine also incorporates. So let's look at the machine a little bit more up close. And I'm going to give you the first row seat view option here. My sampler, which has a nice feature that it falls back to the original position. My drum discharge, my 3 cooling screens, and then here is my control panel. This is exactly the same panel as we also find on the larger Giesen machines. Here we can see F1 is the main screen. Here I set my my thermostat temperature. Here I set my flame level, and when I go to the next screen, this is where I set my air pressure, my drum speed, and then there are some other screens that you can get into for service purposes. And then on this side of the machine, maybe first show you this amazing, the internal works of this sample roaster are very impressive. The Siemens hardware, the PLC, very surface friendly. And in here is the actual clean out station for my chaff. It's a heavy machine, heavily built, but a great tool for your sample roasting needs. So here I have a delicious sample of Finca La Cabra Panama. This is a anaerobic natural coffee. I'm going to roast this in about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit faster. I've been preheating my machine. I'm going to charge this coffee as soon as my air temperature hits 350 degrees, give and take. And I'm going to do a heat soak at that point of 30%. So now I'm getting my machine ready until I hit that point. This is really important that you always use consistent charge temperatures as much as it is important to use consistent weights. We are almost at 350. Fill my beans. Let's wait a little bit until we hit 350. And what I like about this Giesen is the thermocouple here, the bean temperature thermocouple registers really accurately. It also has a second thermocouple that sits here for the air temperature. Then the controllability of the roast through this panel is, I think, really excellent. And so now we are ready to roll, and I'm gonna hit the timer here, and here, and off we go. And we're going to do a heat soak at 30% for about 4 minutes, after which I'm going to increase my flame level to 75%, after which I expect the development of the coffee to start swiftly, so that I can then gradually decrease my flame level to get to the right level of development of the coffee. There's one classical challenge related to the roasting of anaerobic natural coffees, is that often you cannot hear easily the first crack. Partially that's because in this process, this anaerobic natural process, the coffee sits in a closed vessel where there is a lack of oxygen. As a result of that, the chemistry of the coffee changes to a great degree. It's very important to be able to control your machine well, so that you can also handle these anaerobic natural coffees with the utmost level of control, also for the sense of repeatability. So when you're roasting samples, repeatability is really important. What you should be aware of, that during the roasting of samples, you cannot always use automatic time temperature profiles, but you really have to look at how the beans react to the heat that they are exposed to. I've now been doing this heat soak for about 2 minutes. The bean temperature is 235 degrees. Going up to 240 degrees. And so you can see that these beans are only marginally changing their color at this point. But that will start changing quite soon once I increase my flame level. We're now at 253 degrees. The Maillard reactions really are now getting started. So right at this point, I might feel tempted, given the way things develop. My rate of rise is 13 degrees. That is 13 degrees for 30 seconds. So right at this point, I actually now want to give this coffee a push. That means I'm going to go and increase my flame level to 75% right now. That's at 3 minutes, a little bit earlier than I predicted I would do. 75%. My PA is at 100, as you can see here. The lowest setting is 80 on the Giesen. At 100, you have, an adequate level of airflow to be able to develop these beans. And here you can see my home screen, 3 minutes 30. My rate of rise is now increasing neatly. And now I'm going to look for this highest possible points for the rate of rise to be able to finish, to be able to control the roasting of this sample adequately. I'm going to take another sample, approaching 4 minutes. So again, you must be able to do the roasting of samples with the highest level of controllability and of repeatability. You can see there's a very clear yellowing of the beans going on. If I smell these beans, then I kind of smell a kind of a molasses smell, indicating that some sugars are transforming. We're now at 300 degrees, rate of rise is 10.7. We're at 4 minutes 45 seconds. I'm very curious where we will be at 5 minutes. Very soon I will have to start reducing my flame level in order to not to overshoot, to go too fast in this roast. 5 minute mark. Here's my sample. And now I'm going to reduce my flame level to 50%. And rate of rise 10.6. I'd like to see my rate of rise up until like a minute before the first crack at around 6 to 7 degrees. That will allow me to have enough energy, kinetic energy in the beans to be able to develop adequately without going too fast. So anaerobic natural beans, as we produce at La Cabra in Panama, has become a major trend in the world of coffee. The roasting is very challenging. The trick is to allow the beans to absorb enough heat so that that heat that is locked into the cellular structure can then do its important work to drive the process of development of these coffees. Now, I'm beyond 6 minutes. I'm going to reduce to 30%. And I'm going to show another sample. So on this sample roaster, we usually see the first crack at 360, 365 Fahrenheit at this fill weight. And I'm now approaching my 7 minute mark. My rate of rise is 9. Bean temperature 348, going towards 350. And I'm going to show you the bean color. I'm quite happy about the development of this coffee. At this stage, it's a good time to taste beans. It's very hard still, lacks development. 7 minutes 30 seconds, we're at 356. I'm going to show you the next sample at 8 minutes. And I hear a first crack. 356 degrees Fahrenheit at 7 minutes 43 seconds. I'm not making any other adjustments on my roaster at this point. First crack is developing nicely. That is one of the challenges with these anaerobic natural beans. And now this is an 8 minute sample. There's enough energy into this coffee now to be able to finish this roast at this flame level setting. So that's the trick in roasting specifically samples of this type, naturals, honeys, anaerobic naturals. Develop enough energy inside the beans, but come back with your heat supply on time so that that energy in the beans can help drive the process forward. We're now at 8 minutes 48, approaching 9 minutes. My end point for this roast will be around 368, 370, 9-minute mark. I'm going to reduce my flame level to a 5% level, getting ready to finish this roast. Do a quick taste. Now, if you do this at home, this tasting, always have a glass of water, because some of these particles might get caught here in your throat, and that is not always as pleasant, but I'm very used to this. 9:38, I'm going to call the end of the roast, 370 degrees, and we are done. Stop the timer here. And so here we had, just to recap, we had a roast where we did first a heat soak at 30%, charged at 350. I allowed the heat soak to continue for 4 minutes. Then I increased the flame level to 375, and then gradually decreased the flame level, and was able to, I would say, in a controlled way to finish this roast. That's really the essence. So now I'm writing down these parameters. So this will become my protocol for this coffee, for this anaerobic naturals from Pica La Cauda for next samples moving forward. Of course, I'm going to cup this coffee and to see if anything still should be improved roasting wise. And in that way, I can build a consistent and well-controlled program for my sample roasting. So this concludes this episode of Behind the Roast. It's a lot of fun. I try to explain you the protocols and methodology for sample roasting. I think documentation of what you're doing is really key, also to keep track of your flavor profiles. And good luck. Drop me a note if you have any questions. See you again soon.